Welcome back to PlayStation Infinite. Castlevania. It is a franchise that has become beloved since its debut back in 1986. While the shadowy spires of Dracula's castle have remained silent for a decade, that doesn't mean that fans have forgotten the Belmont clan and their eternal battle against the forces of darkness. Those who have enjoyed Castlevania are going to have games in the series that they love and some that they despise. For me, it was Konami's Super Nintendo release that secured my love of the series. I know, this channel is supposed to be about PlayStation games. Super Castlevania IV was originally released on the SNES, but times change. 2019 saw Konami release the Castlevania Anniversary Collection, and this brought together the classic 8 and 16-bit era titles. Yes, believe it or not, the classic, bulky Game Boy was in fact an 8-bit handheld. So, regardless of when these games were originally released, the Anniversary Collection brought the older Castlevania games to next-generation consoles. Super Castlevania IV was initially released back in 1991. This was an era where storylines for video games were straight to the point. Every century, Dracula, the Prince of Darkness, returns from the dead. His arrival has been hastened by the followers of darkness. Thanks to their sinister rituals, the vampiric threat has been reawakened. Simon Belmont, armed only with his whip and training passed down his family for generations, is the only hope for Transylvania to return to peace once more. Many fans and critics alike consider Super Castlevania IV to be one of the best offerings in the series, and I tend to agree with that. The Castlevania series has had both high and low points over its nearly 40-year history. The Nintendo 64 Castlevania, Castlevania II Simon's Quest, and Castlevania The Adventure are often considered to be the worst entries that the series has to offer. Symphony of the Night, Rondo of Blood, and Super Castlevania IV, meanwhile, are often considered the best. This, however, all comes down to individual player preference, and those games that are hated by some are appreciated and enjoyed by others. Super Castlevania IV stays true to the humble origins of the series, but this was released before developers tried to transition the long-standing series to 3D. For Castlevania, the side-scrolling action approach is what has made it an enduring fan favorite. That element has also remained in many of the handheld versions of the game, and while Castlevania II Simon's Quest attempted to add an RPG element to the series, it wouldn't be truly perfected until Symphony of the Night. If some levels in Super Castlevania IV seem vaguely familiar to the original, they should. While it's a sequel, Super Castlevania IV is actually a remake of the original, at least to some extent. Former Castlevania producer Koji Igarashi stated that he felt Super Castlevania IV was a remake. Others, meanwhile, think of it as a retelling. On a side note, Igarashi eventually left Konami and founded Artplay, the studio behind the Bloodstained series, which is considered the spiritual successor to Castlevania. I would assume in part the developers wanted to take advantage of the SNES hardware, and particularly the system's Mode 7 capabilities. This was basically the system ability to scale and rotate graphics. It might seem laughable that this was a selling point given the capabilities of systems today, but back then when the SNES was released, it was revolutionary. Super Castlevania IV showcases this in areas such as the rotating spike room, the spiraling tunnel, and some of the boss battles, at least when they're defeated. The gameplay, of course, is what you'd expect from the series. As stated, it's a side-scrolling action game. In each stage, you must guide Simon through the castle and surrounding terrain, fighting Dracula's undead minions and other monstrosities along the way. There are enemies returning from some of the previous games, such as zombies, skeletons, Medusa heads, bone pillars, and mermen. New enemies appear in the game as well, including the first appearance of the ectoplasm balls, the Horsehead, or Mr. Head as he was named, which never appears on the series again, and various ghostly apparitions. The dancing ghosts and even their stage have always given me the feeling that the Haunted Mansion at Disneyland may have served as a major influence in the level design. Simon will also have bosses to contend with. Some of these will be found at the end of stages, others right in the middle. Some of the end bosses can be a little challenging, but once you've learned their pattern, they should fall rather quickly. Mid-stage bosses, meanwhile, tend to be a lot easier to defeat. Just like in other Castlevania games, you can also expect to find special weapons along the way to assist you in your battle. The dagger, the axe, the stopwatch, and the firebomb are all there if you can find them. Personally, my favorite weapon in Castlevania has always been the boomerang, but really it all comes down to what weapon is going to work best for you. You'll also want to stock up on hearts, which of course are used for the special weapons, but they're readily available by destroying candelabras and defeating certain enemies through the stages. Simon can also collect invincibility urns, the precious rosary, which will destroy everything on the screen, and of course the double and triple shots, which will increase the number of times you can use your sub-weapons in succession. Health items and 1-ups are sparse and add another degree of challenge to the game. Super Castlevania IV may look dated in terms of graphics, but I feel it still holds up extremely well considering the era it was designed in. The game takes the look and feel of the original game and does a stunning visual transformation in the leap from 8 to 16-bit. The castle and levels are more detailed and give more depth to the game. If the game is in fact a remake, then the adventure has been changed and expanded. In the original Castlevania, players started directly within the walls of the castle, but Simon now begins his adventure on surrounding grounds. Simon must now make his way through forests and ruins before he even confronts the Prince of Darkness. There are of course hazards everywhere as well. Among these are the enemies that tend to knock you off platforms when you're not expecting it. Mermen spitting water can knock you off into the murky depths. Don't forget about falling objects, and if you just happen to be close enough, that one small bit of rock or piece of chandelier will cause damage. In the original NES games, you could only whip in the direction that you were facing, but in Super Castlevania IV, that changes. Simon can now whip diagonally, up, and even hold the whip in front of him to fight his foes. Even better is the ability to latch onto rings in some areas and swing to the next platform. This becomes crucial in later stages in the game, where you'll need to swing to a higher platform to continue your quest, or you will need to hang from a ring to avoid certain death. I've always felt the music in this game is one of the best soundtracks that the series has to offer. I know many people seem to gravitate towards the Symphony of the Night soundtrack, and while it's not bad, Super Castlevania IV really has a different feel to me. The soundtrack has a more gothic approach, and it's very symphonic at points. It adds a huge amount of atmosphere to the game and can even add in tension. A perfect example of this is where you make your way to the swinging chandeliers. If it isn't bad enough trying to time your jump so you don't fall to your death, the accompanying music amplifies everything. The often frantic piano and the strings that build into a more ominous musical section before looping back to the beginning has made this one of my favorite parts of the game. Super Castlevania IV has withstood the test of time. While the game has minor flaws, such as the occasional slowdown, something I always attributed to the SNES, but clearly that wasn't the case, it doesn't take away from the overall enjoyment of the game. But after 10 years, it's well past time that fans were taken back to the dark and shadowy lands surrounding Dracula's castle so we can battle the undead prince once again. That's it for now. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you again next time.